Yamato-san! Mathematics is the tool by which the worldview and physics are imagined. The basic actions of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing are the four arithmetic operations. We added new actions cut, move, superposition, and turn inside out, and patented a quantum gate for a quantum computer. 1 apple divided by 2 is half piece of the apple. A division is folded in 2 and stored on the reverse side. 1 cut 2 is divided into 2 pieces, left and right. What? You might be able to compute the concept left and right. Right and left are concepts. Please imagine a line between left and right. Place a moving head on it. The head can move on the line, making moving cut line. By moving the left to the right, it makes a function. On the other direction, another function. This symbol is dynamization arithmetic. Cut operator. The symbol that creates the concept is the cat. Treat right and left as concepts, then it exists at both ends of the apple, like a plane without mass, just as a coin is three-dimensional, but the front and back surfaces are two-dimensional, making it the concept in a sense. This will be the command symbol that moves between and among those concepts. We have to understand the relationship between infinity and infinitesimal to understand superposition arithmetic. This is because the limit n tends to infinity does not reach infinity. Infinitesimal cannot reach 0, so this is the case. In dynamization arithmetic, the notch moves like this. If we bring this arithmetic into the relationship between infinity and infinitesimal, infinity settles into the two-dimensional surface of integration, and infinity the two-dimensional surface of differentiation. Now let's superimpose infinitesimal and infinity. At this point, you will notice that each square will look similar. Expressing this by superposition, we can confirm that the superposition of the gradation becomes the function f, which becomes the entanglement of differentiation and integration. If the break of the Mitsuyoshi operator goes to the left, there will be as a +1. The opposite is -1. Here we use the Mobius strip mechanism to compute the infinite superposition of qualitative and polar. If you move the cut of the Mitsuyoshi operator on the left to the right, it becomes overlap of 0 and 1. If you move the cutoff of the Mitsuyoshi operator on the right to the left, it becomes overlapping of 0 and -1. This gradually overlaps the gradation. Zeros and ones, in other words infinity, are superimposed on the vertical axis with alternating positive and negative polarities so that they are orthogonal to the positive and negative horizontal vectors at the center. In fact, in mathematics, 1 is the only certain existence. That is because it becomes possible to say only that one existence. Then we can also say that 1 is infinity, and there may be an imaginary gate at the break of the Mobius loop. What happens when this combination alternates colors like the combination on the left? Then imagine that the North Pole and the origin of the Riemann sphere overlap here. There are unrecognizable abacus B's in the unrecognizable left gray area. In fact, this abacus B's will be a negative B's. Can you see how the negative B's decreases as the real B's increases in the multiplication? It is easy to understand the calculation by imagining a Japanese abacus with a ring structure. You can see how dynamics create multiplication and division, and how they bounce back and forth between them. If you move the cut of the Mitsuyoshi operator on the left to the right, it becomes overlap of 0 and 1. If you move the cutoff of the Mitsuyoshi operator on the right to the left, it becomes overlapping of 0 and -1. This gradually overlaps the gradation, but if you simplify it, it will look like this. From this superposition calculation, the state of superposition of 0 and 1 changes every moment. The area with only 0 and the area with only 1 is called the quality that is included as in V, and the change in the area is output as a function. Then, the area where 0 and 1 overlap and share is rev, and it is calculated as a gradation function change. From the output of this back calculation, consciousness and unconsciousness are subjects that cannot be dealt with in science, but we may be able to calculate them by using this superposition and finding rev and inv that change over time. Can we understand this orthogonal model by superimposing the conscious and the unconscious? Then, what is the existence of imaginary numbers and its pairs? Ordinary people perceive the logic that if A is B, overlapping in a straight line. A logic, if A then B. If you look at the white and black cylinders from the side, you can only see a white circle. If the black cylinders are orthogonal, the black cylinders will clearly look different from the white cylinders. A and B are clearly separated, i.e. orthogonal. B is not A. This is not A. This is a useful symbol when dealing with human consciousness, not in mathematics. If not A, then not B. The perspective creates a basis of consciousness. When the budding of consciousness is grasped by mathematics, the intersection is always 0 when viewed from the x-axis because with x equal to 0, because the concept exists but has no reality, it becomes empty set Q. The orthogonal axis, the xyz axis, is Q as an empty set because it can be said to exist at x equal to 0, y to 0, z equal to 0. However, y and z suddenly appear as an axis extending to infinity, as in ball 1. Moreover, it generates an x-axis and a complex plane that are 0. Not 0. This is not 0. Not 0. If you change the viewpoint from the direction of 1, the other complex plane is generated. Not 1. If not 0, then not 1. If humans think by visual and conscious biases, A and B are clearly separated, which is recognized as orthogonal. Similarly, the not B bias is also formed when creating the opposite side of consciousness. I used wo in ancient Japanese Toyokuni characters as a reference, and it resembled the handle of an operator, so I adopted it. The characters used as references for the back calculated symbols are the ancient Japanese characters, called Toyokuni characters or jindamoji, mythological period characters. The characters corresponding to wo in this script were adopted because of their similarity to the Mitsuyoshi operator, slider handle. Then we can be aware of the orthogonal axis, as the thing that is not x, not x. The reference was the ancient Japanese character, Mizukukimoji, which corresponds to the whale of the operator, so I adopted it. The design of the Mitsuyoshi operator's whale was taken from an ancient Japanese character called Mizukukimoji, and the orthogonal partner is on the imaginary axis. I would like to call it Urazan and use it as a symbol for the most primitive signal processing of consciousness that describes the mechanism of human morality. X is 0, x-axis. Y is 0, y-axis. If it leans a little, it becomes a function. Z-axis is generated from Z is 0. This is where 0 is dot origin. Function is now in space. functions create matter, 3-dimension, deviate, even slightly from the field of the z-axis, and suddenly it becomes a function. A function is both a wave and a substance. It also becomes an arithmetic that makes it possible to collectively make it a consciousness as not. The complex brain is a brain containing numbers in consciousness, called imaginary numbers. Do functions on the brain create consciousness? Does 2 axes of consciousness on 3 brains create matter? This is the answer that orthogonal Rosen gives. The concept of number, it means material. Is this place a 0? This straight line between white and black is an overlap of 0 and infinity, right? This is superposition operator. The number that is only the ultimate image is 0. 0 can only be established by orthogonality, right? Where is 0? Here we use the Mobius strip mechanism to compute the infinite superposition of qualitative and polar. If you move the cut of the Mitsuyoshi operator on the left to the right, it becomes overlap of 0 and 1. Moving on the right to the left, overlapping of 0 and -1. At this time, the color of the backside of the Mobius strip is different, so the entanglements of 0 and 1 and 0 and 1 are also combinations of different colors. For example, in may not be like this, making me not a such relationship, like this. At this time, if the arrows are multiplication, the answers of the upper and lower expressions are both 1, so they are the same. Let this relationship be rev, then all combinations can be included in rev. However, the inv is different in the relationship between front and back, and the vector is opposite from the positive and negative inv difference. If you bring this into core arithmetic operations, you will find that it is a useful tool that enables a natural explanation of imaginary numbers. What would happen if this were a Mobius strip, whose front and back sides were colored positive and negative? The way it flows from the negative 0 on the red surface to the reverse one on the blue surface changes. Since the back sides of Mobius strips have different colors, the entanglements of 0 and 1 and 0 and 1 are also combinations of different colors. The imaginary axis separates colors nicely and produces positive and negative vectors. At this time, only vectors exist because the discontinuity of Mobius strip is an imaginary area. Also, since different colors are in an orthogonal relationship, we can be aware of positive and negative as not. It can be seen that the square of rev 1 in the orthogonal reverse calculation with 0 Mitsuyoshi 1 as 1 becomes negative when the orthogonal base alternate. Since the relation is equivalent, it becomes equal. This produces not 0 and not 1 from the already relationship if you let the inv differ. This also makes it possible to explain imaginary numbers. Replacing this relationship with Riemann sphere, we flip the not 0 expression on the right and place it to the left of the expression on the left. It becomes like the house with its surface and crust. Now, when considering the leftmost equation, let the boundary be the 0 axis. Then, it turns out that the imaginary axis is in the opposite direction, so the surface is inside, and the inside is the surface. The gradation of entanglement at the discontinuities of the Mobius strip is defined and controlled by a function. Let this be 0 rev 1 as the rev function. Within this rev, any combination of inv exists. For example, put out the following inv cross combination on the red side. Next, put out the following inv cross combination on the blue surface. The combination of this inv becomes a positive and negative multiplication on the red surface, and it resembles the imaginary number of 1. On the back side, the blue side it becomes a positive side by multiplying positive and positive, negative and negative. Here, we can also see that negative and imaginary numbers are imaginary entities that cannot be recognized from the combination of inv. In the meantime, the multiplication of negative and negative also becomes homogeneous left in the direction of in B, and a mechanism has been created that allows even imageries to become positive. This is simply the relationship between rev and in B as stranding often used in matrix calculations. This is called the Mobius cut transform. It can be said that it is an evolved form of cut arithmetic. Multiplying in B with vectors in different directions will result in -1. In other words, it represents the square of the imaginary number. 1 for vectors in the same direction. Isn't the former a number that represents consciousness? God and devil. Only God can be seen from this point of view. Let's bend the concept of the devil at right angles. Those who are not gods become imaginary demons. If you look at it from the devil's side, you can only see the devil. Similarly, if we array the concept of God, anything that is not a demon is an imaginary god. In other words, God and the devil are two sides of the same coin. Now let's look at it from above. God and the devil are one. Let's move the Mitsuyoshi operator between God and devil. Between the concepts of God and devil, there is an imaginary space where gradually changing imaginary gods and imaginary devils overlap. It is also presented as the Mobius cut conversion. You can see that angels and demons overlap in the imaginary space. The existence of dualism, using two-dimensional knot in the imaginary field created by human consciousness, is obvious when considering the imaginary number axis generated from superposition. Moreover, it is still assumed that if one side of the negative imaginary number is determined like a quantum gate, the other side is determined. Exactly, it is the current situation, where the appearance of the imaginary field can only be captured in two dimensions. If A and B are treated coaxially instead of orally, A becomes a space-dimensional perspective and becomes two sides of the same coin. But where's the blunt pointing fact that becomes the gradation model? This is the commonality that a human being is intertwined with the duality of good and evil, and this is called where being indicates that the aspect differs individually. If perfect evil and good are only two-dimensional planes at the ends of this three-dimensional model, consciousness can be said to be a complex brain. Considering the limit state of Q, in this extended Riemann model, swelled radius becomes Mobius strip, which is called Mitsuyoshi ring. I predicted not only the simple two-dimensional Riemannian sphere, but also the back Riemannian sphere, the inverse Riemannian sphere, and the sphere. Also, if the Mobius strip exists in the limit state, at the same level as zero, it becomes possible to receive all the infinitely existing vectors parallelly on the twisted surface of the band. From future quantum experiments, we will confirm whether the quantum entanglements can be reproduced in the computation of the Mitsuyoshi operator. Humans tend to think of the Earth as everything. However, physically, the inside of the crust, which has an overwhelmingly large amount, is the Earth itself. This gives us an image of turning the perspective of the Riemann sphere, which is only the surface, to the inner solid. The Earth's surface is represented by a blue line. The reverse side of the blue line on the ground is wave, and the symmetrical vector difference between the two sides is recognized. Let's bring this wave back to the spherical surface more and more. Then, the inner vector of the sphere becomes a cross-spatial solid. This is called inv. Everything has a backside of inverse calculation. Structurally, the bottom bar is digital, and the polarity is reversed. The top bar is the gradient function, with the quality orthogonal and inverted. It is similar to crossing in matrix calculation. This is because the functionality of a function determines its quality. This is called quality reversal. This state is interpreted as phase transition in the opposite field. In fact, it is still unclear whether the bicomics numbers J and K are multiplied to give I, but there is a possibility that both are the back imaginary number in B minus imaginary number. As yet, we are unaware of this area, anti-field transform field. B is consciousness signal with respect to A is in B. A is consciousness signal with respect to B is in B. A. share the essential quality of A and B rep AB. Well, what is cool? To explain in a way that even a social scientist can easily imagine. Both warriors and scholars have a shared quality as seekers, since it is the opposite pole of moving, and static it becomes such a polarity reversal. On the other hand, there is an internal difference between learning and fighting, and it is easy to understand if you understand it as a qualitative reversal. What would happen if we reproduce this as a quantum gate with artificial nerves? Experiments were conducted to artificially reproduce nerves with quantum gates made from dynamization and inverse arithmetics. Then the waveform can fill the inside of the sphere. As a result, the extended Riemann sphere appears, and when you reach the point of the null pole, all stimulation disappears. Does this mean that there is now a gap to receive the next stimulus? Simulations on supercomputers produce completely different spatial coordinates. A function was output there to represent the state in which nerve stimulation was transmitted to the nerve on the distal side. At the same time, the function to the central side also appeared. When the function was gauged, it exhibited a sigmoidal function representing the neuronal's action potential. Similar to feedback phenomena in human neural models, it may have been possible to reproduce the human nervous state naturally. Anti-field infinity energies fill a very small amount of space. From the correct viewpoint, infinity matter fills a very small gap. At the true field, when the fabric of four arithmetic additions and four arithmetic operations passes through the quantum gate and shifts to the opposite world, the Mitsuyoshi operations, which were calculations of continuous quantities, become separate, and the four arithmetic operations, which were independent arithmetic, become continuity. This is assumed a qualitative transformation model. In general, negative imaginary numbers are assumed to be on the imaginary number line. However, we replace this with the orthogonal principal model of consciousness. This inverts the poles and transforms the quality. In a reproduction experiment using an artificial nerve, feedback to the limit occurred at the same time as the appearance of the anti-world, so this model regards the emergence of the universe at the limit. The Mitsuyoshi operator was created as a computational tool for signal processing of consciousness, which cannot be visualized even by AMI, as a vector, just as there are functions for converting invisible radio waves into waveforms. Just as an unknown craftsman used to make brass furnaces and lenses long ago, he created a new arithmetic. And we have developed from artificial nerves to artificial ego by creating an emergent engineering model using an anti-Riemannian sphere whose consciousness exists in the anti-field. When the conductor wheels the tact, you can also see the movement. Just as radio waves that cannot be seen on radio are recognized as voice, the player perceives the waveform of the movement of the tact. Just as radio waves that cannot be seen on radio are recognized as voice, the player perceives the waveform of the movement of the tact. It is also possible to convert accurate movements into waveforms and make them into functions. I modeled the feedback to the Riemann sphere in the real field as the emergence of consciousness and the anti-world as an unconscious generator. The mechanism within Q is as follows. Superposition of limit and trend to infinity and limit and trend to zero is demonstrated. If you add the inverse calculation here, there will be plus and minus in the real field. A minus is represented as the inverse of a plus. This may represent the polarity in the real field. Let's superposition consciousness and anti-field consciousness. Consciousness and anti-field consciousness are generated by moving the Mitsuyoshi operator. The anti-field 0 and the real field 0 are cross-multiplied by consciousness and AF consciousness, which are expanded on the imaginary axis. The complex plane is projected into the tangent the real field and anti-field zeros, and Rev and Invi are computed. As such entity is antimatter. Looking at the aspect of polarity reversal in the real field, it looks like reverse matter rather than antimatter. This results in a polarity reversal at the real field. It is necessary to clearly divide anti-inverse and reverse by words and mathematical symbols and standardize them. Like the difference between expressions in the back of the West and the reverse of Japan, there exists the ambiguity of undeveloped language symbols, such as division. Right now, I'm trying to experiment with what will happen in their transform field. First, let's explain addition and multiplication using vectors. If you add facing right vector and facing right vector together, you get even with facing left vector and facing left vector. Then, what if we superimpose the facing right vector and facing left vector? Do you know that the vector of the superposition will be like this? It is different from addition and multiplication. Let's explain the back calculation of Rev with a vector. If you add plus and minus, you get 0. But if you think of this as a vector, isn't a huge amount of energy accumulated when it reaches 0? Second, when you multiply a plus by a minus, you always get a minus. Let's remember this phenomenon. This is the same even if the plus and minus are in tangent. When you think of pluses and minuses as vectors, when you get to 0, isn't there an enormous amount of energy stored? Plus, minus. Vector plus, vector minus. Left to right, right to left. Plus multiplied by minus is minus. Thinking of it as a vector of plus and minus, if you decide to always input from the front and back of the coin, the output will always be back, regardless of whether it is right or left. Think of this as a shared quality, defined as Rev. The two views of an object refer to the same thing. The relationship, function of being inextricably linked is output. The answer of this superplan is called musubi. Combinations with different vector directions are different from each other. This relationship is represented by an orthogonal model of up and down. The difference between Rev and Invi is calculated and determined as a quality, which we call inversion calculation. Like quarks, the two contradict each other and become different. Since this difference is inherent in each individual, we will define it as inversion and call it Invi. The difference between Rev and Invi is calculated and determined as a quality, which we call inversion calculation. Combinations with different vector directions are in a state in which the Invi is different from each other and the polarities are reversed. If you convert the difference between up and down with this phenomenon to thought, it will be only the surface on the visible side. The dualism of good and evil is established. Let's assume that good and evil existed as two sides of the same coin in the first place. Yes, boy, the opponent becomes not and wrong, which is not right. Using this feature of inverse as a model and Invi as a bicomex number, there is a possibility that it will lead to the elementary particle theory of up and down. Based on the above hypotheses, artificial knobs were reproduced using quantum gates made from Mitsuyoshi operators dynamization and inversion. When the artificial knob is stimulated, it creates a positive Riemann sphere, and the wave function fills the inside of the sphere. As a result, the extended Riemann sphere appears. Eventually, when you reach the point at the North Pole, all stimulation disappears. Supercomputer simulations produce entirely different spatial coordinates. If this corresponds to the generation of knobs, the extended Riemann in theory is a tremendous invention and discovery. In the figure, it is expressed as a plane, but it becomes three-dimensional. By outputting a function there, we were able to simulate the state of transmission to the central nervous system. Not only that, but a function in the opposite direction to the body side also appeared. A Applying the Fuller's method conditions to explain this phenomenon, I was able to explain it by back calculation using rep and inv. In general, negative imaginary numbers are assumed to be on the imaginary number line. However, when this was replaced with the orthogonal principle model of consciousness, it was consistent with the phenomenon that occurred. It is thought that the knob was in the imaginary area orthogonal to a. In addition, since the feedback in the recoil is also generated in the area, it is a reproduction of the past phenomenon. Medically, it seems to be similar to the feedback phenomenon of human nerves. It may have an intentionally recreated human neural state. This is because, when the function was bridged, it exhibited the same sigmoidal function as the action potential, unlike the existing neural network that runs the sigmoid by coding. It is considered that the sigmoid function was generated naturally, and it can be said to be a deductive proof. The concept of a very fine black hole in an extended Riemannian artificial nerve, a super black hole in the Eulogin universe, at the neural junction, stimuli input from the body form consciousness as an empty set through qualitative transformation, and matter function fills the neural gap. Then, an empty set as a substance is generated as a nerve by Mobius-Kerr transformation. Information is thought to be transmitted as waves as conceptual functions in the empty set. What is the consciousness created by the extended Riemannian artificial nerve? The anti-field, or parallel world as it is commonly called, is infinitely dispersed and connected to a dynamic equilibrium. When these multi-universe-like functions are included in matter functions, the dense and heavy functions that come in at the end knock out the thinner functions. Thin functions are thrown far, but heavy functions are close together. Do they become like magnets, closing in on each other and overlapping, and this affects consciousness and matter, leading to the evolution, change of the present field. If we perceive this change as time, Einstein would agree. If the function consciousness is the gate, then the white hole thesis is true. Then, when the anti-field is observed from the present field, the anti-field becomes like the exact opposite of the present field, and thus the complex brain, which exists infinitely in an unchanging state, becomes a function and a circular structure. Is it possible that the complex brain creates an orthogonal present field, while from an anti-field viewpoint, the illusion of spacetime and spacetime which in turn becomes matter? The projectile theory, which has been the topic of much discussion recently, is unnatural because it is only the present world. But what if it is an anti-field gate in the synaptic as a thought experiment, thinnest conceptual function? Dense and strong consciousness functions tend to overlap with other similar matter functions. Common sense formation if there is a special function that annihilates at this time. Does this vector create the orientation of the will? Let's do all try. 1 human divided by 2 is 2 pieces of man. In division, we assume that the divided objects are stored on the backside, but stored backside. A, if and only if B divided by 2 is what? Devil or God? Wrong or right? Turn over. You can see that they are equivalent on the front and back of the coin. When Momotaro tribe A fights the Oni tribe B, the difference between two tribes is just 1 point. In dualism, inverses means not. That's why the history taught to us that those who believe in the same God are destined to kill each other. Let's think of this relationship in terms of magnets. The The other party is the enemy, because they are not as evil. I am just as. In the first place, aren't we together we are? Qubits form pairs code entanglements in the state of superposition of zeros and ones. Considering dynamization of observation and reverse, we can see that observation and reverse are obtained by cut operation front and back of the function that qubit has. If you think about thread cut operation, inside occurs between observation and reverse. Plus, minus, multiply, division, cut, dynamization, superposition, reverse. They work like rope and weft like fabric. 4 arithmetic operations are independent each other, where Japanese 4 operations are continuous. In the plus, in the minus, in the multiply, in the division. Pineapple McQueen squash.
Come on, come on.